I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller, and today I am so excited to be joined by Shelby Van Pelt, who wrote a book that you may have heard about. If you were in a Barnes & Noble store at the time, you probably remember the octopus book, but Remarkably Bright Creatures is something so special. It has some of the most memorable and lovable characters I've ever read, and of course, an octopus that I will never forget. So, Shelby, thank you so much for joining us to talk about Remarkably Bright Creatures.
Oh, thanks, Jenna. It's great to be here.
I have to start with the octopus in the room. I love when a book gets connected with something bigger than the book itself. I love when people find that thing in a book that makes them tell their friends, tell people in the checkout line, tell whoever, like, oh, I've read this book because it's about blank. So I was hoping you could start by telling us a little bit about the book, about why you chose to write about this, and how it all came together.
Well, it truly is that octopus book. I have heard from so many booksellers and librarians that, folks come in and they don't necessarily remember the title, but they'll say, hey, do you have that octopus book? Yeah, it might be the only piece of literary fiction out there that's actually narrated by an octopus. Although, as I'm sure you know, octopuses have really been having this zeitgeist moment the last few years, and I feel so fortunate to have sort of happened into the middle of that and become a part of it. My I don't have a science background or really an octopus background other than I'm just someone who started watching octopuses on the internet a few years ago on YouTube and became kind of fascinated and, a little bit obsessed, as one sometimes does with things that the algorithm feeds us. I was just kind of starting out in my fiction writing journey. I didn't go to school for writing or anything like that, so I'm kind of self-taught. And I was trying to figure out, how to write fiction. And so I was trying to take inspiration from the world around me and, kind of fell into this clutch of octopus videos and thought to myself that that would be a really fun voice to write. And it was an incredibly fun voice to write.
I love that. I used to be kind of scared of them. I don't know. There's something so otherworldly about them that I used to be like, oh, I don't want to know too much. But then the more I started to learn about them, sort of in this renaissance of octopus information that we have, and just how intelligent they are, the types of things that they're able to accomplish, like puzzles and camouflage and all of it, I was like, oh, this is maybe not exactly the creature that I thought it was.
I mean, it might be, but it also might be partially the creature that you thought it was, too. I mean, they're very strong. Okay, here's a fun fact about me. I've never been scuba diving. I'm a little bit terrified of scuba diving. If I were down there and an octopus came up to me, I mean, A, that would be incredible. But I think it would also be a little bit of a vulnerable moment just because I've seen the videos of when they suck onto you and don't want to let go. And, the human is not totally in control of that situation.
And yet, like so many things, it's so easy to fall into, oh, I need to know more about this, and I need to know. And I think that in so many ways happens to the characters in this book as well. They just fall into needing to learn more, especially Tova. I mean, to watch her go on this journey through getting to know this octopus, but yet also I love how quickly she was ready to be like, well, I'm just going to talk to it like anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, Marcellus is the only character who really listens to her. She has this group of friends, and, they love her, care about her deeply, but they're kind of always trying to fix her rather than truly listening to her. And for that reason, I think she kind of has learned to shut down around them. She truly is, lonely in a crowded room, lonely in this crowded community full of people who love her. And in Marcellus, she finds really the only soul that will just sort of hear her speak and absorb it without judgment, which is really funny to me because Marcellus is so judgy about just about everything. But when it comes to Tova, he is able to just sort of be there for her.
He does have a lot of opinions, and I really love that. I wonder if this all sort of started with the idea of the octopus. How did you come to the character of Tova? How did you find her voice in this story?
Well, Tova is really largely inspired by my grandmother, my Swedish grandmother that some of us have. It's, almost a little archetype of its own. But, she has a lot in common with Tova. My grandmother, also from Sweden, also like just stature wise, very small, but like very, very tough, like, surprisingly tough for her size, incredibly hardworking, incredibly stoic, particularly around the sharing of her emotions. She was very much a person who just kind of, put your head down, you keep working, everything is always just fine. And when I had the character of Marcellus, and at some point realized I couldn't write a whole book of just Marcellus, although, maybe I could have in hindsight. Maybe people would have wanted to read that, but I kind of thought, hey, I've got to have some characters of the human variety in here. The fact that Marcellus is sort of stuck and, facing sort of this change in his life, which for Marcellus is really like the end of his life cycle. He's counting down the days. And for Tova, she is also metaphorically stuck in this place in her life where she sort of sees what's coming down the turnpike, that she is probably not going to be able to maintain this stubborn independence forever. She is watching her friends have these life changes that, they are more reliant on their families, on their children, grandchildren, and, reflecting on the fact that she doesn't have those things. And, it kind of makes her want to just like to run away from the difficulty of confronting that. And so she's kind of stuck, and Marcellus is stuck. And really this idea of stuckness was what sort of, brought them together, I guess, in the beginning, and ended up being a major theme in the novel.
I love the way that all of these characters, Tova, Cameron, Marcellus, how they encounter change, and the way that they are in varying times so excited by it and in its thrall, but are also really afraid of it and really unsure of what they want to do next.
Yeah, I think Cameron in particular really struggles with being afraid, to bet on himself, to take any kind of risk. He's a bright guy, and there's no reason he can't become a fully formed adult and do all these things. But every time he sort of gets up on the edge of doing something, he kind of just sinks himself. And I think all of the characters, including Marcellus, just have this sort of idea of what they think the future is going to look like in the beginning. Marcellus even says it, like, I'm going to die here in this tank. And what really, sets a lot of the plot and the character interactions in motion is when these characters are forced to challenge those notions of what they think is going to happen.
And so much of that comes from the characters and the people around them. I love the way you've created an ensemble that feels like people you'd meet in a small town. Whether they're like eating a yam sandwich in the airport or spilling some particularly unsavory beans at a going away party, like it's all these characters that weave together so well to show this is what these people's lives are like.
I absolutely love writing small towns. They're so delightfully claustrophobic, and, particularly when you have the characters in some ways, like it almost feels a little bit old school to write a small town because these people are just trapped together. And, of course, they have their phones and their ways of, escaping into sort of the broader internet world that we're all a part of. But when it comes down to it, like, yeah, you're stuck going to that store to buy your groceries, and you're going to have to talk to that guy who really likes to gossip. And, you're going to run into someone that knew someone you knew in high school and deal with the fallout from that.
I used to work in a mom and pop grocery store, and it was like that. People would just like gossip in the aisles.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, from a purely like authorly point of view, it makes the job easier sometimes because the tension just is already there. They just by the fact that these people are sort of stuck together, the tension sort of creates itself.
But I love the setting of this book so much. I think the way that you've described Soul Bay it makes it a character itself. That you have all these characters interacting within it, but it almost feels like, in a weird way, that there's an energy in the town that's doing something all on its own.
Yeah, I love one thing I love about the Pacific Northwest, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington. Now I live out in the suburbs of Chicago, which is just very different geographically, and I've lived a bunch of other places in between too. So I've gotten a feel for sort of, the vibes that different places give off. And, I think if there is a place that I know that has really gives the vibe of like secrets, it would be the Pacific Northwest. I mean, again, to go back to kind of the claustrophobia, the trees are so thick. There's moss on everything. Everything is just so dense. You walk in the woods and your footsteps don't make a sound because everything is just moist and soft and absorbs your energy. I remember the first time I went and saw a beach where the water was clear and you could see the bottom. And that was wild to me because the water that I grew up with in Puget Sound and the Salish Sea in Washington State, the water is a literal black hole. It is freezing cold and it's dark and like you don't go down there. And it just seemed like the perfect place to sort of hide a secret, really.
Yeah, the beaches of Pacific Northwest are so different, I think, than what most people obviously think of when they think of a beach. I am not a beach person until I went to Oregon and went to what I affectionately call the Goonies Beach and realized for the first time, I was like, oh, maybe I can like a beach because this is cold and kind of overcast.
And moody, so
Yes.
moody. And yeah, I mean, that's probably why Goonies was set there because it's totally the place where there would be like a secret underworld.
Yes. And I think that watching the characters navigate in the different ways that they sort of fit in this setting is so interesting because we have Tova, who for most of her life has lived in this one place and has really grown up, and especially this connection she has with the house that she lives in, to seeing Cameron, who doesn't quite feel right anywhere, and watching him connect with the town. It really feels special.
I grew up in a house that was built by my great-grandfather, and I'm going to try to get this right. Sometimes I mess it up. So my great-grandfather built my house, and my grandmother grew up there. When she became an adult, she married another Swede, another carpenter, and he bought the plot of land next door and built a house. And that is where my mom grew up. My mom grows up and gets married and buys the house next door that my grandmother had grown up in, which is where I grew up. And so my grandmother was next door in these two houses that were both like constructed by the bare hands of my grandfather and great grandfather. There was no like general contractor. They just built it. And I'm a little bit sad to say I broke the cycle and moved away. My house that I grew up in was like 900 square feet and only had one bathroom. And I'm sorry to the karmic, forces behind me breaking the chain there, but I needed two bathrooms. But yeah, I feel like I was just really tapping into like that sense of, a house being so much the part of someone's kind of fabric of their soul and really feeling incredibly rooted to it, and then, of course, the change comes and, how do you deal with that change?
And for Cameron to walk in and not ever feel like he's maybe been able to put down roots, never to feel connected in that way, other than to his aunt, who he loves very dearly. But there's always something there that's seeking, that he's looking for something that he, frankly, doesn't even know what he's looking for.
Right.
It really,
he thinks he knows.
Yes. Yeah, he thinks he knows, and he thinks he can get certain things by finding it. I don't want to say too much because I feel like there's so many good things that we learn along with him, but just to watch him and that yearning he has for something that he doesn't even understand, I feel like that so many people have had something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, anyone I think who has moved around a lot probably feels that a little bit. I know I feel it in my adulthood, having, lived a bunch of places between, the age of 22 and now 44. Sometimes I feel like who is my sports team? Where do I belong? It's just kind of like, I'll always belong in Tacoma, Washington, but, I don't live there now and I probably won't live there again. So, yeah, that feeling of rootlessness, and especially in, I feel like people move around so much more than they used to. And it's really common to meet people who have, this sort of shallower roots, but in more places. And I think Cameron is definitely feeling that, obviously made so much more acute by the fact that, he doesn't really know either of his parents and really, thinks that being able to get that knowledge will be just a magic solution for him.
And I feel like that piece, the magic solution, is something that so many people can connect to, that if I just had blank, then everything else would fall into place. And to watch Cameron go on that journey of really thinking, oh, if I could just fill in these pieces, everything else must just fix itself, right?
Right. This is if only,
And I love the way that this is not I would not call this a sad book. I do not think this is a book that feels heavy or really brings that sad feeling. And yet this is a book about grief in so many ways for all of these characters.
Yeah, I was having lunch with my agent a few months ago, and she put it a way that I really liked. She said, "You wrote a funny book about grief." It's very hard to sit down and say, I'm going to write something funny today. And I don't really think of myself as a comedy writer in that way. But I did want it to be a take on grief that had a lot of levity to it. That was, these people are yearning for these things that they're missing, and they're grappling with how to deal with change and get unstuck from these places in their lives. But they're surrounded by, this cast of characters that sort of never lets it get too sad or too heavy.
And my favorite character to do that in this book is my dear sweet Ethan, who...
Oh, I love Ethan too.
It just flew off the page for me and really is such an instrumental hand in like making things happen in a way that only like a small town gossip can do, but is also so loving and so funny.
I loved the idea of the town gossip being like this 50-something-year-old man. I just think it's hilarious. Because it's, so stereotypically it's a woman. And I just figured what better place to put him than at the grocery store. He's right in the center of everything. And he's, in a lot of ways, he's the anti-Tova. And that's part of the reason why it was so fun to write them together, because they are just so different, and yet they get along, yet they seem to fit with one another. I love the friendship that develops there. And, and watching them really grow to understand one another, despite the fact that, he just cannot stop talking about this and that and is in everyone's business. And Tova could not be more horrified at the idea of being a gossip or being in everyone's business.
Watching all of these characters, I think what you just said was like a click for me to be like, oh, all of these characters need to learn how to understand each other. So much of this book is them learning how to understand each other and learning how to be understood, letting themselves be understood and seen by someone else. I like even Tova and Marcellus, they learn to understand each other and they both let each other in. Cameron and Tova, there's so many of these moments where it's just about letting yourself be loved and seen.
It can be very hard to let people in, especially for a character, like Tova, who I mentioned was sort of took a lot from my grandmother and brought it into Tova. And I think that's something that I felt with my grandmother. We were so close. Like I mentioned, I had grown up living next door to her. I probably spent, so much more time with my grandmother than most people get to spend with a grandparent, because just our proximity and the time we spent together. But I feel like I have some real regrets around, especially as I got older, and became a teenager, a young adult, not like really trying to get to know her better before she died. She passed away in 2017. And before this book was more than a chapter or two, I don't think she's very proud if she's looking down on this, but might also be like rolling over in her grave a little bit. She was such a private person, and I've now, drawn this character that was sort of based on her, and it's everywhere in the world now. But yeah, that's, that is her struggle, is how to let people in, how to open up. And, honestly, that's something I struggle with too. So I think I wrote a lot of my own, my own self into her.
Especially for Tova going through something in her small town that no one really understands. The grief that she is experiencing is so, I don't want to say unique, because it's not in the grand scheme of things, but unfortunately, but for her, she doesn't feel like anyone really understands what she is going through and how to let anyone see the pain she's in.
Right. She just kind of, I would imagine she says to herself, they couldn't possibly understand, so why try? Which is kind of similar to Cameron in some ways. He just thinks, oh, I've had it so hard. No one could possibly understand this. So, why should I even try to be better?
And we as the readers are like, but Ethan is right there. But Cameron, your friends and your aunt are right there. Like, just like, when you want to shake the pages and say, like, just take a look around.
I love writing characters that people want to shake. And I say that in all seriousness because, these are our friends, these are our family. And, you just you want them to do better. And it's because you care about them and because you know that they can do better than what they're currently doing.
For me, I feel like I got an extra dose of that because of the way you structure the book, that we really get these snapshots into the moments of different characters. I mean, obviously we have Marcellus's portions, which are very distinct, but even amongst the others, to just get, now we're with Ethan, now we're with Tova, now we're with Cameron. And we know that we're sort of maybe missing a few things in between, but these snapshots are so crystal clear. When you were writing, did you know that you wanted to sort of bounce back and forth between these perspectives?
I did, yeah. I love voice is one of my favorite things to write, and to be honest, like writing the different voices, like that part comes much more easily to me than the plotting part. And so I just, I kind of figure and hope, like, if I can get these characters, if I can really dial in their voices and figure out who they are and just keep putting them together in various combinations, like they will figure out what the plot of the book is. But yeah, I knew that I wanted to have it be that sort of multi-POV. I struggled a little bit with whether to also have it be multi-timeline, because this is a story where a lot of it takes place in the past. And a lot of it takes place through the knowledge of Tova. And Tova, frankly, is just not a person who's going to spend a lot of time sitting around ruminating about the past, even in her own internal monologue. So that was definitely a challenge to figure out, how do I impart this information, for instance, about her memories of her son, or what was happening, back in 1989 with these characters whose actions are very relevant to what's happening in the present, without having to do the flashbacks, because it just felt like too much to be going first person to third person when we're going from Marcellus to the rest of the characters, between all of these different points of view, and then be going back and forth in time. So that was a big challenge.
I totally agree why you would want to put that in, because there is so much richness in those memories in that past. But I love that we really stay with these characters in their present day, and we learn what we need to learn. And there's some things we don't learn, and that is okay, because what we get is the story we need to get. And I love that. And I do think my favorite part was that you do something that I think we need more of in literary fiction today, is chapter titles. I love a chapter title.
I do too. So I wasn't sure that I was going to do chapter titles. I write in a program called Scrivener, which some of the folks listening who are writers might be familiar with it, but it's basically like a Microsoft Word or Google Doc word processor, except that it has, you can kind of put your different scenes into these little packets that you can drag around. It just has all of these functions that make it a lot easier to keep track of the various things that you're writing. And for my own purposes, in order to keep track, I started giving each, in the name of the little file on the side that represented a scene or a chapter, I started giving them these little names so that I could remember in my own head. And I started getting a little bit cheeky with it, just, so it would stick out in my mind that, oh, that's what that was. And when I got to the end, I think I had what I thought were pretty good ones for maybe about like half of them, maybe 2/3. And I had this decision point of like, okay, am I going to go through the effort of trying to come up with really good chapter titles for the ones that I don't have something I like, or just go back to like 1, 2, 3, 4? And I decided to put the effort in and try to get the titles right. But, at that point, I hadn't even gotten an agent yet. This was just a manuscript. And I kept reading like, oh, chapter titles are out, and I thought, I kind of at the time thought this is going to be wasted effort on the very unlikely chance that this ever actually gets published. They're probably going to make me get rid of the chapter titles. But, I'm glad that I, I stuck with it and put the effort in because I do think they add something. And I like it as a reader too when chapters have titles.
Yeah, I know that it doesn't work in every setting, and I'm willing to accept that. But I think in a book like this that has such a great voice, and I mean that like in total, that that what is happening, the way you're taking us through these characters' journeys is so distinct that having those little extra pops of personality, it's like, oh, I just want to get to the next chapter to see what it's called, and then I have to know once I read it. It really is so much fun to read.
Yeah, well, I feel like they're little Easter eggs. Like the chapter title seems like something completely out of left field, and then you find it in the chapter where it's referenced, and it's like a fun little discovery.
I know. I feel like, especially on the Marcellus chapters, I was like, he would probably be like, no, I have a better title, but I'll accept that one. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love the way, too, that these characters come together in ways that feel real for the world that we live in. That these aren't all perfect, magical, happy endings that fill all the gaps and dot all the I's and cross all the T's. There's some things at the end where I was like, oh, that makes sense, but I kind of wish that I knew that they were going to be okay. I feel like I know that they are doing well in my mind, but I wonder if you sort of miss these characters and if you feel like they're all doing okay.
Well, I think, when writing epilogues, I feel like that's the choice. Like, how far do you skip ahead? And, I can think of like a particular movie that I used to watch where they are children in the movie and they skip ahead to adulthood when they're all happen to be married to each other. I'm not going to say the name of the movie. And that always bugged me because it was way too neat. And so, in this is not really a spoiler, but, here I chose to skip ahead a very, very short period of time to show, the sort of after picture, which really is a pretty raw little beginning that these folks are embarking on. But yeah, it feels more real that way. And I think it does, leave it to the reader to use their own imagination a little bit. I love it when books sort of trust me to use my imagination a bit instead of spelling every single last thing out. And so that was sort of what I was aiming for.
I agree. And I think that there are so many moments in this book that I had to like go Google something because you sparked my interest and I had to like know more. I mean, obviously I was Googling octopus because I needed to see all the trappings going on or the other sea creatures mentioned at the aquarium because I find myself a bit of a rabbit hole reader that when I don't know about something, I'm like Googling that. I'm Googling like how much band t-shirts cost. I just was like, I need to know more.
Yeah, I'm a rabbit hole writer, which is not always a great thing. I have a policy. I get 5 minutes to Google something. And then if I have not answered my own question, I have to just put a note and move on because I'll like spend, whatever time I've allotted for myself for writing, I'll just surf the internet and find fun things. But yeah, my hope was that people would learn a lot about octopuses reading the book. I certainly learned a lot about them writing it. And, readers will be happy to know that everything Marcellus is doing in the book is technically possible for an octopus to do as it relates to his physical world around him. So, I've had people at book events who are like, they're like, octopuses can't really get through an opening that size, can they? And I'm like, yeah, if you Google this, there's, literally thousands of videos out there. They can, they can manipulate their environment. The stuff that's going on in his head, we don't know. Obviously, I've never seen any indication that scientists believe octopuses can read, can read the English language as Marcellus can. But, we don't know. We just don't.
I'm choosing to believe it's true. And that's my choice as a reader. I wonder, speaking of being able to read the human language, I would love to be able to talk about some of your literary influences and some of your favorite authors and books.
Sure. Well, I always, when I think about probably the book that I've read in my life that had the most impact directly on writing Remarkably Bright Creatures, it has to be Charlotte's Web. I mean, just not even for the similarity of like, oh, you have an eight-legged thing and an eight-legged thing. Like beyond that, I remember reading it and loving it as a kid, obviously, but then, reading it again as an adult aloud to my kids. And that was kind of right when I was starting the journey of writing this book that I was doing that. And just really respecting how well done that was, how easy it can be to slip into something really cheesy when you're writing about like, sentient animals, talking animals, when you're anthropomorphizing animals, doing that in kind of like a respectful way that, that doesn't overdo it, I guess. So yeah, that is definitely, I think, for me, one of my big personal influences. And also the idea that, I think as, of course, the young girl, Fern, who is, the protagonist of the story, is visiting the barnyard and talking to the animals, when her parents are talking about her, and they're like, oh, is she a little bit crazy? Like, this is not normal for a kid. Animals don't talk. And then they're like, well, maybe they do. Maybe we just don't know how to listen. And as cheesy as that is, I really took that to heart when I was writing, Tova and Marcellus. And, I knew that Marcellus was not going to actually talk, like that would be too far. But they were going to communicate. They were going to have this exchange, and it was going to hinge on like sort of knowing how to listen to those moments that they were having, even though they were nonverbal. So yeah, that was a big influence. I remember reading John Irving when I was in my 20s. And after being away from reading for a little while, I think I didn't read a lot for pleasure in high school and college. I just had other things going on. Kind of came back to reading in my 20s and reading A Prayer for Owen Meany. And I think it was the first time I had really read a novel like for craft, and being so impressed at those characterizations and how they just stuck with you long after you had closed the book. And, being kind of convinced that there must be some sort of magic. How is he using the same words that everybody else has, yet is able to create this character with them? And, I'm still a huge John Irving fan. John, if you want to blurb my next book, you know where to find me.
Love that. That feels like those things together. I'm like, oh, I can see how those influences might be in there. I love getting to hear the way that, especially something like Charlotte's Web, which, when you're reading it as a kid or giving it to a kid, you might be like, oh, that's just a book. But it's crazy how much those children's books stick with us and really
Absolutely.
influence the way that we are as writers, readers, and even as just humans.
Well, and it's just like I feel like in some ways it probably gave me the audacity to try it, right? Like, I'm sure that if E.B. White was sitting around, whatever he was doing at the time when he came up with the idea, people would have said like, that's a ridiculous idea. Don't do that. But he did.
Well, and I think that, I mean, anyone choosing to write a novel, even if it is going to live in your computer forever, it's never going to see the light. I mean, that's what an undertaking, what a brave choice to commit to it.
When people ask me for writing advice, which is always really funny to me because I feel like I am on the hot mess express over here when it comes to my own writing practices and drafting, like I'm still learning. But, I always say like try the weird thing, like the thing that you think is really cool. You might be worried there's no market for this. This is going to seem ridiculous. I will never forget hearing from my agent how my now agent, I was querying her at the time, and my query letter landed in her slush pile. She has an assistant whose job it is to go through the slush pile and pass on just a few to Kristen, to my agent, and wrote on the margin of my query letter, like, this is either brilliant or bananas. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of bananas, but like it somehow worked. So, you never know unless you try.
That would be the blurb I want on my book. This is either brilliant or bananas, because that feels like it sums up my life pretty well.
Same.
And now, so we're approaching the paperback of this book being
Yes.
out. And the paperback, which is a beautiful, wonderful, magical creature all in itself.
It is. It is. Can I hold it up? It's beautiful.
Yes.
It
Ooh,
is. If
yes.
you're watching, you will see it has beautiful stenciled edges, blue with some beautiful coral and fish on the side. It's just they did a gorgeous job.
It's going to be so much fun to have that out because I think it's going to reach a whole new set of people as it enters this new phase of its life. But is there anything that has surprised you the most about having the book out in the world so far?
I think the thing that has surprised me the most is really just the intensity and kind of like the poignancy of interactions with readers. That really has been more impactful on me than I ever could have imagined it would be. There's a saying, and there's books are magic. And I really think they kind of are when it comes to bringing people together, when it comes to sort of breaking down, the walls that we have around us, offering almost sort of like this shortcut to real vulnerability, to real connection. I never would have imagined that I would be able to have some of the conversations I've had with people who have read the book and, come to a book event and wanted to talk about it, or I've visited a lot of book clubs over the last few years and, getting to participate in some of those discussions with them, or even just witness their discussions with each other that are brought about by reading the same book. I never would have imagined that that could be such a powerful thing, but I've seen it over and over again, and it's incredible. I never would have imagined that this book could reach so many readers as it has. But it's not just my book. I think it's books in general are just really kind of magic that way.
It is something unlike anything else. I think books in general, but especially fiction, has this way to connect us and to teach us. And I always say that I like to put as much of myself into a book that I'm reading as I get out. And I think that when we do that, there's so much to learn about ourselves and about anyone around us.
Yeah, about people around you that, you might not otherwise be learning that about them, It's incredible.
And even about an octopus that I maybe used to be scared of.
Yes, well, I'm sure that you've gone down the Google rabbit hole. But if anyone is listening and they haven't, if you have some time to waste on the internet, and don't we all have time to waste on the internet, stop the doom scrolling, stop the algorithm, shorts, and get on, the Octo Talk, Octo TikTok. Get on the octopus videos because there are so many out there, and they are as educational as they are fun to watch.
I love that. And I love that we get to have these conversations because of Remarkably Bright Creatures. And I am so excited for people to get their hands on the paperback and to fall in love with these characters just like I did. So Shelby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a joy.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.